without any further ado, I'm going to pin my father's video, and he'll speak today about this evening's title, Flying High, Living as a Jew in the World of Aviation. Bechavod, Papa, all the way from Israel.
Hi, good evening, shalom to everybody. I'm very happy to see a number of faces that I've met when I came in Arizona. Is the sound okay?
Perfect.
Okay, I leave you some seconds to get used to my French accent. What I like to say regarding the way I've been introduced, and including in the announcement, a lot of bold characters, and there was Rabbi Allouche father in small characters. I think I would have said the opposite, and I put Rabbi Allouche father in big character. I think this is one of my best titles, and I think it's the biggest achievement when you can be presented as the father of your son. I have to say that I am a bit not so comfortable to talk about I, me, and myself, and therefore I would hope that at the end of my presentations, people will not say only, well, we hear very nice stories, but that they can do something out of it in their own life, because I'm maybe talking about my own stories and own career, but I'm quite sure that everybody has his own stories and can also take some lessons of what I'm going to say. So the title is to talk about my life as a Jew in the world of aviation. Indeed, I would like to talk about, so to say, both my professional career, and I'm going to share with you some slides, not too technical ones, but I would like to share with you. And so I'm going to talk about my professional career and also of my, so to say, Jewish career. And I don't see things as two parallel and separate paths. I think these are intermixed. And it is true that now I am entering a new era in my life. I just retired from Israel Aerospace Industries after in total 44 years of industry experience, both in France, both in manned and both in Israel, and both in manned, so to what's called manned aircraft with pilots, and unmanned aircraft without pilot, but we talk a bit later. So briefly speaking, I cannot say that since I am a child, I was dreaming about building airplane or becoming an aerospace engineer. I had a lot of dreams when I was young. I do remember that I was perhaps 3 years old. That was in '56 at the time of Sinai War. And I built a toy, which was a tank. And I had said to my parents, with this tank, I want to kill Nasser. So I had already some kind of Jewish dreams. But as a matter of fact, I was born in a small town in France, La Flèche, where we were the only Jewish families. And my father was in the French army. He had done the Second World War, and he was sent to La Flèche because there was a gymnasium for children of military people. This is where I studied, and I have many stories there, but I was very feeling as a Jew. I was the only Jews, and I can remember some very memories. I will mention only one because it just happened very recently. I knew a bit of Hebrew, reading in a Siddur, but not everything. And in particular, there is this way to write Hebrew. And my French teacher was not a Jew. Once he went to the board and started writing Hebrew letters in the way you write them handwritten. And he turned to me and he said, Allouche, I'm sure you know that. I was so ashamed that I never saw that I start the following Sunday to do writing. And some days ago, I managed to find his phone and to talk to him. He did remember very well the stories. But I want just to say that sometimes you live among goyims and they send you signs. And that was one of the signs to get more into my Judaism, to get more into my Hebrew and so on. So I started really to dream at that time to come in Israel and to live, but it took some time, as you will see. I studied aerospace engineering in France. It's not like in the States. It's called Grande École d'Ingénieur. You do a lot of math and physics before you really start learning aerospace engineering. And this is in Toulouse, where I went to this Grande École of Aerospace Engineering, where I remember the very first course, which is a kind of lesson in the life as well, where the mechanical professor of mechanics told us, okay, you did a lot of mathematics until now. You learned about the sign equal. Now you're going to be an engineer, and it's about time to learn about the sign about. Not everything is exact in life. You have to cope with approximating things and to deal with it. And that's a big memory in my life of starting my aerospace engineering. So this is also the time where in Toulouse I met my wife, Cathy, that someone know already, and we got married. We were students in Toulouse, and this is also the time where we, so to say, met Chabad and learned the first time about the Lubavitcher Rebbe because of the shluchim who came. This is, Toulouse is a place where I had one of my first work. I worked for Airbus Industries. Airbus, I'm talking to American people, who was at the time a very hard competitor of Boeing. And it was really the very beginning. And in fact, I entered Airbus working on the very first fly-by-wire aircraft. I'm going to share my first slides just to show you in what it is all about. Can I share my screen?
I suppose, yeah, I think so. There you go.
So I don't want to be too technical, but you see, I will deviate from time to time, as I say, from aerospace engineering to Judaism. And I was talking about the first aircraft with fly-by-wire. What does it mean? Very simply, you could see in these schematics that the conventional way of flying an aircraft is to go from the control wheel to the control surfaces and to move the aircraft through mechanical cables. Now, for the first time, we add a so-called fly-by-wire aircraft, which means that the pilot is now using a side stick because it just needs to send electrical signals to the flight control computers. And this computer is sending signals to the control surfaces. So you can see this is the principles. We use a side stick, and you can see also the image of the very first Airbus sent to the United States. That was a big noise about it. And I remember a big advertisement from Airbus, because you should know, in fact, in any aircraft, you have a lot of equipment. And the advertisement said that when a US company buys an Airbus, here is a list of all the US company will take benefits, and including the engines, of course. So I started working on Airbus, but at that time, I had already the will to make Aliyah. And after I decided that we were going to ask advice from the Rebbe. Back to 79, we had been visiting the Rebbe for the first time. We had a private audience, My oldest daughter, Karen, was 11 months, and my son, Pinchas, was about to be born. And it's amazingly, this date where we met the Rebbe for the first time is a date where my daughter get engaged and my son, Pinchas, get married. But at any rate, I don't want to go into too much details of the whole story of what Rabbi Stenzels called our long, shortest way to Eretz Israel, but it was made of a number of advice of the Rebbe. In 85, I was supposed to come already in Israel and work on the Lavi project. Some of you may have heard about it. It was a fighter aircraft project by IAI. And the Rebbe asked us to wait a little bit. And he mentioned that the situation is so much changing in Eretz Israel. So we didn't go, we put a hold. And 1 year after, I got a sudden proposal to go to South Africa. That's why my son has got some South African accent sometimes. And we lived there 5 years. But what is amazing is that when we arrived in South Africa, the Lavi project was stopped, and now we understood why the Rebbe says the situation is so much changing in Eretz Israel. But 5 years after, from South Africa, we moved to Israel, and we made Aliyah, the anti-family, Baruch Hashem, and I start my work at Israel Aerospace Industries. So my first work was on a business aircraft, and I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, so you have it here. And my first one was on this aircraft, which is in fact called the Galaxy. This is a business aircraft which is been now commercialized by Gulfstream. It's an aircraft with 19 passengers, and my work was to develop and design what's called the stall protection systems. Unfortunately, I'm sure you heard about the crash of Boeing 737 MAX, which was due to a malfunction of these stall protection systems. So I'm going to try to explain you very briefly what it is all about, and then we'll see what we can learn in our day-to-day life about this physical phenomena. As you can see here, it's very strange that an aircraft can fly. I mean, you have the weight which is supposed to bring down the aircraft like any object with a gravitation force. So you have to create a lift, and therefore you have to push, so to say, the aircraft. This is a thrust. But doing so, you get a drag, which is a resistance of the air. So the lift itself is created by the airflow, but doing so, you are creating a kind of opposition to it. Now, in order to have the lift, as you can see in the graph below, you need to have a certain inclination of the aircraft, which is called the angle of attack. And this is creating the lift. But if you are, so to say, pitching up too much the aircraft, then you reach the stall conditions. That means that the aircraft cannot stay and it loses the lift, and you will crash. And this system, which I was designing with this aircraft, was simply to sense this angle of attack and then to push the stick in order to pitch down the aircraft. I hope you are still with me.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to come back to the Jewish lessons we learned from these four forces and from the lift and the drag, as I mentioned before. And in fact, this is there's a book which is collecting all the saying of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on science and what you can learn in your day-to-day life. And about aircraft, you have it here in front of you. As I said, in order to create lift, you need to push the aircraft. Doing so, you get an opposition the drag, but this is the only way to create lift. And what we can learn from that in our day-to-day life, it means that in order to get uplifted, so to say, you have to face some opposition, some challenge, some difficulties, but out of them, you create lift, you are uplifted, and every difficulties in life, every challenge is in fact an opportunity that Hashem gives you to get uplifted and to go from strength to strength. So let's stop sharing. And now we are still at Israel Aerospace Industries, where after a while and having my background of Airbus, as I said, one of the challenge of an aircraft with fly-by-wire was to create new technical requirements. The regulations which is applicable to conventional unmanned aircraft was not adapted, and you had to take into account of the new technologies. Now, when I was in and then start my career in Israel Aerospace Industries, I moved quite quickly to the unmanned aircraft systems to deal with, in fact, flight safety and to deal with the same kind of issues that you have the technologies, but you don't have the proper standards. You cannot apply the same kind of standards you are applying to manned aircraft. And again, I'm going to share the screen to share with you a bit of the challenge of an unmanned aircraft systems. And you can see here the number of unmanned aircraft system configuration. So you see it's very strange, but the world has not really decided on the way to call this aircraft. My son talked about UAVs, that's right. We talk in Hebrew, we call sometimes malat, which are the initials of matos lelot tayas. We call them remotely piloted aircraft system, which might be a terminology which is the best, in fact. And when we say in Hebrew, matos lelot tayas, aircraft without pilots, it's not completely true unless we go now to the next generation, which will be totally autonomous aircraft. But as a matter of fact, for all these aircraft, you do have a pilot which is controlling the aircraft remotely. But what is challenging here is that you have so many configurations, as you can see, and you have so many possible ways, from the mini UAVs to big unmanned aircrafts, which are mainly used in the military field. I'm not going to put to bring too much details on unfortunately what we are doing at IAI, but you can imagine that we are designing the full range of unmanned aircraft from small to big. And the applications are numerous, not only militaries, but also civil ones, commercial ones, basically to do surveillance, to do some kind of monitoring, could be monitoring pilot plans, and all these things now in the fields. And now you have to decide how you want to operate the systems. Are you going to operate in the same airspace as manned aircraft? Are you going to fly above populated areas? These are things which are challenging when we're talking about flight safety. And when you are going to build flight safety, you have to be aware of the difference between unmanned aircraft and manned aircraft. Both are viewed as aircraft. But in the case of unmanned aircraft system, it's not only the aircraft we are dealing with. We are dealing with the whole systems. You have the remote control stations, you have the link, you have the various systems, and you have to take into account that the risk is not the same. For the time being, we have no passenger on board, even though the time will come, but there is no pilot on board, and the risk is not for passengers, except when Obama fly non-manned aircraft, as you can see from the picture, but normally there is no passengers, no pilots, and you have to take care of the risk of this aircraft on one hand to the ground, which could mean that you could endanger people on the grounds. So you have to make them safe, and you have to make sure they are not colliding with other manned aircraft in the airspace, and therefore you have to find some kind of detect and avoid system. All this is to tell you that the big challenge, one of the big challenge, and especially when we go to the civil field, is to find regulation and standards to ensure both safety and economic viability. And this is why beside my work in IAI, I become very much involved in this international rule-making process in order to adapt the standards, adapt the flight safety requirements from manned aircraft to non-manned aircraft. And I became the chairman of an organization which is called EuroCAE, where I had to manage a working group from all over the world, industries and civil aviation authorities, in order to create these standards. In fact, this is the interest of the industry to impact these standards, and that's why I find a big interest in sending me in this kind of working group. And this is where I start flying all over the world, doing lectures, going to meeting, and this is one where I was saying that I'm going to mix everything, my career and my Jewish career. And beyond what I just explained, I will not go too much more into the details, but I had in mind something we heard from the Rebbe just before we left South Africa. And this is something which is with me since that time. And I would suggest that everybody can take that with him as well. And he said that Akadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, so to say, create causes for a Jew to go in different places in the world because he has a mission. He has a mission to witness, to testify about the unicity of Hashem, to provide a witnessing and to testify about his Yiddishkeit. And so therefore, when you have some kind of any reason to travel, any, so to say, professional mission, there is always behind that a kind of deeper meaning. And I must say that wherever I have been all over the world, and I'm going to share some picture with you, I was always looking for a kind of deeper meaning. And I made a point to end up my lecture always with something which is related to Judaism, provide a quote. And I want to share with you two amazing slides, which I had when I was lecturing. One of them is, in fact, this one. You could see me here in Japan. And I explained to them that the first unmanned aircraft of mankind was, in fact, the dove of Noah. And I put it in English, in Hebrew, and in Japanese, as you can see, hopefully. And what was amazing at the end of presentation, everybody in the assistance wanted to make a picture with me and the slide. So I never forget this experience where people discover that, in fact, unmanned aircraft were born in the Bible. And I also used to present some other slides where I could find the connections between the idea of unmanned aircraft and what our sages, our rabbis says. And it's a quote of Pirkei Avot, which I had once to make a lecture in Singapore. I'm using here the Chinese translations initiated by Rabbi Steinsaltz, and which states that, as a matter of fact, a bit like an unmanned aircraft, you have to know what is above you because this is a seeing eye and a hearing ear, and all the actions are set down on records. And this is not only what unmanned aircraft is doing, but obviously what Hashem is doing. So that was a kind of quote I was doing. I have been all over the world. You can see me here when I'm chairing these working groups in Europe, and proudly with my kippah. And I want to share with you two additional stories regarding the fact that I went all over the world as Jews aerospace engineers. And I had a very interesting experience some years ago when I was called by my own, you remember I say I was in Toulouse in my aerospace engineering school, and they asked me to come to their annual conference and do a presentation of the history of 30 years of drones, of unmanned aircraft in Israel. I accepted, of course, after I checked with my security department, and I went to Toulouse. But 2 days before I arrived, I got a very interesting mail, I would say, that they writing this way. Because of some laws in France regarding external signs of religions, we would be very disturbed if you would come and present your lecture with your kippah. I was shocked. I replied immediately that I've been all around the world for the past 30 years, and was it in the European commissions, in all kind of Ministry of Defense, and everybody knew how to respect my conviction. I do intend to present my lecture with my kippah. And I arrived, they replied, okay, we're waiting for you, without mentioning again the story of the kippah. But when I arrived, I was welcomed by a security officer, but also by the organizer of the conference. And you will be guessing, he apologized for the mail he sent to me, and he said, you had a very right answer, and we're sorry of having written that. It was in the middle of the day. My conference was starting at 5 o'clock. So, and the security officer, that was a very harsh time just before what happened in Toulouse with, unfortunately, with the bombing of a Jewish school. And he told me, we are closing the amphitheater until your conference. And when I came back to my hotel to rest a little bit, and the receptionist told me, oh, Monsieur Allouche, you don't have to worry, a policeman has checked your room. So you see, I was finally welcomed like a prime minister, and I think it's a big lesson. I mean, this is my experience living among non-Jews. The more you are proud about your Jewishness, the more you are showing that it's not a shame to be Jews, the more you're going to be respected. And to finish with the second stories, I've been in a lot of places, and I mentioned, or I didn't mention, but it was mentioned in my CV, that I had a very big privilege to meet Rabbi Stenzals when I was already in Toulouse. He made a lecture on the mystics of the Rambam. By the way, my son was 7 years old, and this was the first time he met him. He had already some questions to ask him. And he talked about his book, The 13 Petaled Rose. And I was 2 months after in the States, and I found the book. I bought it. I was so hypnotized by the book that once I finished my reading, I decided to translate it in French. It was some 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, for the past 30 years, I've continued to translate. But 1 year ago, I would say, I was in Canada for a meeting in the International Civil Aviation Organizations. I had to stay for Shabbat in Montreal, and I stayed Shabbat by one of my cousins in Montreal. There was a lot of guests, and I was asked to tell stories. So I tell a story about the 13 Petaled Rose in French, which was a very moving story. When I start to translate, I had in mind that, please God, this book will be read by a lot of people, and if it can touch at least one Jew, I will be very happy. So 5 years before, and this is a story I am mentioning at the table of Shabbat in Montreal. So 5 years before, we had a guest in our home in Jerusalem, And when this guest came home, he looked at my bookshelf and he took the 13 Petal Rose in French, took it out and turned to me saying, you know what? This is a book where I started to enter into a more Jewish life and I start to make Teshuva, so to say. So I'm telling the story in Montreal in this Shabbos tables. And besides me, there was a guy and his wife also with a kippah, with a bird. And he turned to me and he said, you see my eyes with a terrible French-Canadian accent. And he told me, you see, my eyes are wet. I'm listening to you and you should know I decided to become converted after I read the book. So you see, this is exactly what I meant when I said mixing my professional career with my Jewish career, reminding the fact that Hashem creates causes for you to not only to do the external reason of your traveling, of your missions, but to have a deeper meaning. And thanks God, I could see, so to say, the eyes of the divine providence. But I'd like to conclude with what I started. I beg you not just to say, well, we heard nice stories, but to take some of the things I told you. I'm sure everybody can apply it to his own life. And this would be the best I could say about this lecture. And this is the way I would like to conclude as well. I am prepared to answer some questions, maybe not all the questions, but I will try.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Papa. Thank you. I do have some private questions. And in the meantime, again, I encourage anyone to ask any questions you may have. But here's one private question, if you don't mind. So I'm not going to quote, of course, the name, but this is the question. And you work with the Europeans. Have you ever encountered any anti-Semitism, which you alluded to? But are there any?
No, I have to say no. The only story I mentioned was when I get to Toulouse, where it was not really anti-Semitics, but a kind of relating to my Jewishness and the way I'm showing my Jewishness. But as I said, it was immediately interrupted by the fact that I was very strong and stark about it. Now going all over the places and lecturing with my kippah, putting quotes at the end of my presentations, it was already always very much appreciated. And it just happened once time that I didn't have time to prepare my last slides and people were protesting, where is your last slide? So no, I didn't have any anti-Semitic stories to say.
All right, just one more private question. And then again, I want to open this up, but this is the private question. Yeah, I'm reading. Was there one particular event in your Teshuva story that made you do Teshuva?
You know, this is one of the books.
I just want to explain. I know it's asking, but Teshuva, of course, I think is an ongoing journey for everyone. But it's the journey of returning to your true self, of becoming more and more connected to your Jewish neshama and to your Jewish soul. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I could have mentioned a lot of stories, of course. And as you said, I mean, Teshuva is not only from the past. I mean, we are doing Teshuva every day, hopefully at least. And I have translated a very good book of Rabbi Stenzal's, which is called Teshuva. And it's a kind of guide, not only a practical guide, but also a kind of psychological guide. And over there, he mentioned it's always very difficult to find when was a turning point. At least immediately, you are not even aware of it. You just realize it years after. And I can pinpoint one event. I said I was in a military gymnasium. I was the only Jew there. And strangely enough, the priest, or the priest, how do you say?
Priest, yeah.
Priest. The priest asked me to come and lecture on Judaism. I was 14 years old, and a lot of things was theory for me. But still, I start to explain why we don't believe in what they believe in quite an aggressive way, but you know, I was young. But then I make a full lecture on Judaism, on the Shabbat, on the Kashrut, and I cannot say I was observing 100%, far from that. And then we had a debate, and my comrades were able to ask questions. One question was asked to me by one friend. I never forget his name, Jean-Paul Robert, which is quite a typical French name. And he asked me, tell me, you're talking about a lot of things of Judaism, what you're supposed to do, Shabbat, Kashrut, but does it still exist? I don't think you are doing that exactly. I was terribly embarrassed by the questions, and I think that might have been one of the turning points where slowly but surely I decided to go and progress in Judaism. What is amazing is that 45 years later, when I had my 60th birthday, my whole family made me a book, a surprise book, where they collected a number of witnessing throughout my life of people I've met, and they managed to find this Jean-Paul Robert, which he did remember his lectures, and I could meet him 2 weeks after. And once we recall the stories, after that, I get a mail from him, very nice mail. It could be the start of a biography almost. And he told me, if I understand well, your whole life is an answer to the question I asked you at that time.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Papa.